Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
So I wanted to bring up something that I saw about Theo Von. It was a clip from his podcast. His podcast is called This Past Weekend. Theo Von has come up a couple times now on my podcast. He's mostly apolitical, except he's had a lot of bad takes over the years, and he's having increasingly more good takes. And there's something interesting about him. Plenty of people don't like him for a good reason. He's definitely said bigoted things in the past. He's also a comedian, so some of it was in the spirit of jokes, some of it very much not. When it comes to podcasting, the line between whether something is comedy or whether it's honest commentary is blurring even more with these guys. And so less and less does the whole I'm a comedian defense really hold that much water. Because even if you are a comedian, if you're sitting there talking on your podcast, you know, for hours a week or whatever, and you're just stating your opinions on things, yeah, maybe sometimes it's kind of funny, but at the end of the day, you are saying what you think, and you're saying it to a huge audience of people. And so Theo Von, while I do think he's said plenty of irresponsible things, I definitely wouldn't say that he's a responsible figure when it comes to what he chooses to and not to talk about. Something seems to be shifting where I don't know if he has any interest in drifting to the left or if that's what we're seeing from him, but I think that there is some honest crossover happening in terms of the narratives that he is consuming and where he's applying his skepticism. So just to be clear, I mean, this guy is a Trump supporter. I believe he's interviewed Trump. He has. And he almost certainly voted for Trump. If he didn't publicly say that he voted for Trump, I think it's pretty obvious that he did. And definitely he has a large audience of Trump supporters. So this guy is like definitely on the right. He's not on the left. However, he brought up Palestine recently on his podcast. He's talked about this a couple times. He's spoken with some really interesting figures. I think Gabor Mate and other folks like that. He's spoken with some really interesting figures on this topic in particular. And something seems to have piqued his interest about it. Not sure exactly what it is. I mean, he kind of goes over it here, but that's part of what I want to talk about is how even though Theo Von is coming upon this naturally, earnestly, he comes across as a pretty earnest guy for the most part. There's a lot more going on here than just he's a decent person, so he sees that genocide against Gazans is wrong. That's part of it. But also algorithms play into this, political affiliations play into this, and I think the biggest thing that plays into it is what types of narratives you're exposed to, in what volume, and at what time. And that's probably the biggest determining factor for somebody who is not like obsessed with learning the truth about politics and like really researching it, but somebody who's just kind of learning as they go. They hear things here, they hear things there. If people are inundated with a certain narrative, that's going to indoctrinate them to some degree, and all of us are susceptible to this. And that's a big part of how reactionary beliefs thrive. So let's listen to what Theo Von had to say about Palestine and Gaza and try to think about how we can use that as an example for how to spread better narratives going forward.
You know, I wanted to say something. There's been something that's just been kind of on my heart, and so I feel like I should bring it up. There is, you know, we've had people on the podcast in the past to talk about it. And there's a conflict that's been happening in the Middle East. People know about it, between Israel and Palestine and some of the areas over there, the Gaza area they talk about. And I just think it feels to me, I don't know if it feels to me like it's a genocide that's happening while we're alive here in front of our in front of our lives. And I don't, sometimes I feel like I should say something. I'm not a geologist or geographer or anything like that, so I don't know a lot of some of it I do know though. Like I know the basics of the issues over there, but for me, it's just like how I feel like you see all these photos of people, just children, women, people, body parts, just people like putting their kids back together. And I just can't believe that we're watching that and that more isn't said about it. And so I'm not saying anyone else needs to say anything, but I think I'm just that more isn't said about it by me. So I just, I want to be able to speak up about that I think we're watching probably like, one of the sickest things that's ever happened. And I'm sorry if I've kind of haven't said about it. I've tried to talk about it and learn about it. But I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to say something. I don't even know what to do. And it's crazy because our country's also complicit in it. It's in it and has been for a long time. And it's just kind of interesting because then you just realize, oh, well, I'm a member of this country, but I'm just, what we want sometimes doesn't matter, and you just have to be a member of a place and your government is making other choices.
So some interesting words there from him. And what sticks out to me the most about it, and not just about this, but about a lot of the things that Theo Von says, is that this is the perspective of a person who's coming from a very earnest place. And he's seeing a lot of the same things that we're seeing. He's seeing a lot of the right-wing propaganda. He sees a certain amount of left-wing propaganda as well. Theo Von is the type of person who's trying to figure it out. Now, I think he has certain reactionary impulses, and I would argue that more of his coverage and commentary has been on the reactionary side over the years. And like I said, he interviewed Trump, he interviewed J.D. Vance, he's interviewed Candace Owens a couple times, same as Tim Dillon. So there's a little bit of a network that is organizing itself around podcasters like this, like Theo Von. And that's why I point him out, because I think there's some interesting things going on, not just with what he's saying, but with what it might reflect about his audience or the direction that it might send his audience in. And so I think that this weird cohort of comedians where they are, right-wing, pretty openly right-wing. They're very open to right-wing narratives and politicians. And so you get Andrew Schultz and Theo Von interviewing Donald Trump, etc. And while I think there's obviously naivete involved in that, and I think in most cases, certainly in the case of Theo Von, I don't think he's quite discerning enough to tell the difference between somebody who's lying to him and somebody who is not. However, this is the problem with the Democratic Party at large, is that people view the Democratic Party as a monolith, and for whatever reason, they don't view the Republican Party that way, as of right now. And I think that that's like majorly responsible for Trump winning. And this is something that Sam Cedar talks about a lot, is that separating Trump from Republicans, saying that Republicans are good, they're fine, they're good, good folks who just care about their country in a different way than we do. But Donald Trump is something worse. Donald Trump is something evil. He's something novel. It completely ignores the fact that the Republican Party has in many ways purposely set the stage for a figure like Trump. And so in that way, they're at least monolithic in the sense that they're all willing to get behind him because he is their dear leader, their autocratic leader. And so they're going to do what he says. And so even though people might have some sense that Donald Trump is lying to them, for some reason, when it comes to Democrats, they view Democrats as a whole as lying to them. So it's like being lied to by one guy that you can kind of be like, well, I see what you're doing. versus this sort of whole faceless mass entity. And I'm saying this in the case of people who are more earnest, like Theo Von. I don't necessarily think that of Tim Dillon or even Andrew Schultz. I mean, those guys are smart enough to know better. And Theo Von seems to have a different type of moral compass. It's more like a moral clarity or an emotional intelligence or something like that. Because he is approaching this issue from just a very human level. And that leads you to the conclusion that Israel's genocide in Gaza is unacceptable, must be stopped, any means necessary, etc. And frankly, that the state of Israel should have to answer for these crimes. The state of Israel is very young. And so the fact that it's able to be instituted within the last 75 years, and then it's just going to get away with crimes at this scale, he described it as one of the sickest things that's ever happened. And that's true. And I think that that's an accurate way to describe it. That's a normal person's way of looking at this and coping with what we're seeing in Gaza. And it's only gotten worse. And so that's where the cognitive dissonance happens with a guy like Theo Von or anybody who wants to take this pro-Palestine stance and still support Trump. Because even if you think Kamala Harris or Democrats in general would be just as bad for Gaza and it's all the same, blah, 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 I think that's a little bit intellectually lazy, but I see where you're coming from. But when it comes to Trump and Gaza, I mean, Trump was openly saying that Netanyahu should finish the job and the American president should allow Netanyahu to finish the job. And he has continued with that rhetoric since being put in office. So that's where I don't understand why a guy like Theo Von, or maybe I won't say I don't understand, I'll say that I think there's something to dig into. There's a wedge there, which is something that I say often. But there is, because if Theo Von is able to recognize that there is something monstrously morally wrong about Israel's behavior in Gaza and America's facilitating of that, then he can also recognize not only that Donald Trump is now the core perpetuator of that, although Joe Biden was such a helpful, such a fervent supporter of Israel's genocide in Gaza that even Israeli officials were shocked at the amount, the scale of damage and death and slaughter that they were able to get away with under Joe Biden. And there's even some indications that Donald Trump is putting more limits on what they can get away with, not because of some kind of moral clarity, or even not because he doesn't want them to finish the job in his own quotes, but because he recognizes the leverage. Biden seemed to have a moral attachment to the idea of murdering as many Gazans as possible, whereas Donald Trump just sees everything as leverage. He doesn't really care one way or the other, and ultimately, if he can use something that he knows somebody wants, that he knows he has the power to hold over their head, he's going to do it, and he's going to try to get something out of them. So, there's been some chatter about Trump's recent movements, communicating directly with Hamas, which is not traditional, certainly never happened under the Biden administration, and seemingly defying things that Netanyahu wants in certain cases. I think that's mostly just, political negotiations on the world stage. He's just trying to put pressure on Netanyahu for one reason or another. So I wouldn't take that too seriously. Now, again, it's possible that we might see Trump completely pull out the rug from under Netanyahu and Israel just out of spite, but probably not. I mean, Trump as a figure seems pretty dedicated to Israel as well, and he is more psychopathically violent, at least in his rhetoric about it. So that's important to keep in mind. And that's where a guy like Theo Von, as he comes to this moralistic conclusion about Gaza, which I think is good for anybody to come to, and it's good for anybody in his audience to hear this. And I know that it's hard to take a guy like this seriously. It's hard to take him at his word, and that's 100% fair because of the things he said, because of the type of political influence that he's had. But at the end of the day, there's a moral clarity that emanates from what he's saying here that I think many normal people can and would and do relate to. And so I think the most interesting thing about this that he says is that he's been seeing these images of people putting their kids back together, that sort of thing. He says, we're seeing this. And he's right about that. Now, obviously, those images have been happening in a steady stream for, since a week after October 7th, essentially. And so I don't know at what point he became aware of that. He's probably referenced it in the past. I know, like I said, he's talked to people like Hassan Piker and Gabor Mate, and so he's gotten into this subject a little bit. I don't know how much he retains from conversations like that, frankly. But the reason that's interesting to me is because something that I think we should all meditate on is the fact that when he says we're seeing this, we're seeing these images of death and violence and what's happening in Gaza, not everybody's seeing that. And what that is actually is purely an algorithmic thing. So whether you're on Twitter, Instagram, whatever social media you use, if you are engaging with information about what's happening in Gaza, images that are coming out from there, or even if you just have the personality type that the algorithm decides you might be interested in, that it's going to show you those things. And if your eyes are open to that, then you'll see more. You'll interact with it, you'll engage with it, you'll feel the feelings that Theo Von is feeling here, and you might even talk about it. And so there's a lot of people, whether they be pro-Israeli Zionists or just normal people who aren't tapped in with politics, maybe they're a little bit more on the pro-Israel side or whatever, maybe they have no knowledge of any of this stuff and they don't care to learn about it. A lot of those people are not seeing those images. And not only is that a momentary thing, but it exponentially increases. Whatever you're looking at and engaging with on social media, there's an exponential increase over time in how much of that you get shown. Big part of how radicalization happens in modern society in general, including righteous radicalization based on the fact that you're seeing real deaths that are really happening and really, really, really atrocious things that you can't find happening in that many places in the world. I mean, the suffering and just the scale of misery that's happening in Gaza is, very much a focal point of human suffering in the world. The way they're, being deliberately starved, the way that they were incentivized to come back to Gaza only for the bombing to continue. I mean, it's absolutely atrocious. And those are two very wide examples. There are many, many, many more granular examples that are 10 times as bad. So, in other words, Theo Von speaking about this way and casually referencing these videos that he's seen, it shows that he is engaging with that and he's curious about it and he's being shown it on social media. And if you're somebody who's not seeing those images or somebody who has no knowledge of that, that's a reflection of the fact that they have no curiosity about it and maybe that they're just not coming across anything that would draw them in that direction in terms of online content. And so for Theo Von to end up in that space online actually reflects some open-mindedness on his part. Not to say that he would be open-minded towards other left-wing ideas, although I think he is, which is why he talks to people like Bernie Sanders and Hassan Piker. But more so, it reflects a different type of personality than would normally vote for right-wing reactionary politicians. And so there is an interesting change happening in terms of what types of people are willing to call themselves Trump supporters or willing to vote for Trump privately or whatever. And I think many, many people have lost sight of just how corrupt and how atrocious of a human being Donald Trump is and how, fundamentally he's just the type of person who should never be anywhere near power. He's just corrupt to his core. And so he knows nothing other than corruption, and that was only ever his intention getting into politics in the first place. And people have forgotten that. And I think there's an opportunity here, especially as the Gaza crisis continues on with no end in sight, and they can continue murdering as many people as they can, and the Trump administration does things like going after the ICC judges who issued the warrant for the arrest of Netanyahu. That is now how the Trump administration is using its power. So, is a guy like Theo Von, does he have the wherewithal to understand that information and believe it and take it in and be outraged by it if he was confronted with it? Maybe, maybe not. but there's more of an opportunity there than in a lot of right-wing or even like center or center-left commentators. There are many, many people out there all over the spectrum who are way less interested in hearing or talking about the suffering of Palestinians than Theo Von is. And I think really it's just, I'm more talking about his audience and the influence that he has. I don't care that much about him as an individual, but he's got a large audience. And so when he says things like this, what it does is it chips away at the partisanship, and it makes it so that an issue like Israel, Palestine is not straight down the middle, right and left. And there are people on the right who are willing to say, this is atrocious, this is bad, it doesn't matter who's in power. It'd be one thing for him to say this while Joe Biden's in power, but now his guy's in power, and he's saying it. So the connection has not been drawn between what's currently happening in Gaza and his guy. But if that connection were to be drawn, it would, I think, force a certain amount of people to wrestle with the fact that they have enabled a much worse version of an increasingly worsening American fascism. And yes, that includes Joe Biden, and yes, that includes the presidents who came before him. But Trump represents the full mask off of American imperialism and dominant violence. And so a guy like Theo Von is he's signaling that he has the ability to recognize that. And people like this voted for Donald Trump because they want somebody who is going to change the situation. People view Donald Trump as somebody who is willing to make bold moves to change the landscape of the status quo. And they do not view other politicians as willing to do that. Kamala Harris was not able to convince enough people that she is that person, and I don't think she was trying hard enough to convince people that she is that person. She was working harder to convince people that she is a part of the status quo. And turns out that's not what voters wanted. And I think Theo Von and people like him, including Tim Dillon and others who might be a little bit more insidious in their intentions, them coming to the conclusions about Gaza that Theo Von is coming to here could be steps towards outrage being fomented towards Trump, is the point that I'm trying to make here. And while I don't think it's going to happen overnight, and I don't think that guys like this are going to suddenly have a huge change of heart, I don't know if a guy like Theo Von is capable of making all of the synaptic connections that he would need to make in a broad swoop for him to change his mind about Donald Trump. Because people like this will talk out of one side of their mouth and say, Gaza, Palestine, suffering, and then they'll talk out of the other side of their mouth and they'll say, well, Donald Trump is not a politician, he's a businessman, and he just understands this stuff. So it's cognitive dissonance. How useful to us is a figure like Theo Von? I don't know, but I do know that he's showing more humanity than a certain amount of Democrats have shown, a certain amount of Democratic voters have shown, and there's some value to that. And while I don't think trying to cater to people like this is a good idea, I do think that trying to talk about things in a way that will draw them away from the right-wing narratives that they've become attached to could be a useful long-term strategy, not just to get Democrats back in power, but to elect different kinds of leaders who will actually break up the status quo. And the more people start to realize that Donald Trump is serving the status quo more than ever, there is going to be a certain amount of people who are going to be susceptible to the idea that he tricked them. Maybe not all of them, maybe not that many of them. Maybe a guy like Theo Von would be scared to say that publicly, but people are going to start to realize that, especially as these horrific conflicts in Gaza and in Ukraine continue, and Trump continues to not solve those problems. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews, also music. If you like the music that plays in the back of these podcasts, all that's going to be posted there, as well as my EPs. I just dropped a new EP called Dead Internet Theory, which is now available on all platforms, but it was available first for members only. So if you want early access to future music and projects like that, become a member. And if there's other stuff that you would like to see as members only content, let me know and we'll figure some things out.